I absolutely loved Jack of Hearts. This is the second episode of the first season of Good Advice. This is directed by Barnet Kellman and, of course, stars Shelley Long as Susan. We also have Treat Williams as Jack. And I have finished rewatching and reviewing Cheers seasons 1 to 5. I'm now on season 6, but there is a Shelley Long shaped hole in my heart because I've also finished watching all of her films. So I'm now, thankfully, moving on to alternating between Good Advice and Kelly, which is another Shelley Long sitcom. And honestly, I am really looking forward to getting stuck in with Good Advice. Really liked the first episode. Absolutely loved this second episode. So there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I wasn't sure if I'd be doing deep analyses of Good Advice or if it would more just be a case of generally summing up what happens and then sharing some thoughts. This one I will go through the episode basically scene by scene. I don't know if that will be the case going forward. We'll see how I feel with the show, but based purely on this episode and the previous one, I'm so excited. This one starts off with Susan giving therapy to a man who is in a relationship with a prostitute. It turns out he's actually paying the prostitute for her time to go to the therapy session, which kind of makes me wonder just how much he is paying for this woman and also for Susan's time. And it's an interesting enough way to start things off. We then get in with a couple of the main points, and we actually establish that the building is in between receptionists. If you're unaware or if you haven't seen the show or heard my previous discussion, the building where Susan works is also where Jack works. Susan provides a lot of marriage counselling. Jack is a divorce attorney. So basically they have opposing approaches to their career, with Susan obviously trying to keep marriages together, and Jack benefits if people are going through a divorce. And I think that this is a really great setup, and they have obviously a shared receptionist. And I wasn't expecting this, but the receptionist from the previous episode is no longer in this episode, which seems like a very quick cast change. I'm wondering if maybe the previous episode, the pilot, was filmed a considerable amount of time before the second episode, and that's why maybe the actor wanted to go on to different things. I don't know. It's irrelevant, but the point there is that I wasn't expecting a new receptionist so soon. And we have the first moment where I laughed out loud. And this is where Susan, who is acting as receptionist, takes a message for Jack. She passes this message on to Jack, and it's got something to do with gambling. I don't fully understand it because I don't gamble, but Susan didn't take the message down properly, and Jack's getting stressed. And Susan says, "Jack, do you have a gambling problem?" And Jack replies, "Well, now I do," which I just thought was very funny. We then find out that we do have a new receptionist arriving, and Artie has hired his mother. And it doesn't take too long for her to enter the episode. This is a character called Ronnie, played by Estelle Harris. And I did look ahead, and she is at least in another episode, so it's not a case of a new receptionist every episode. And I thought she was pretty great. She may not be the best person for the job. She doesn't really know her way around computers as far as we can tell, but certainly I liked what she brought to this episode. And she already, thanks to Artie, knows quite a lot about Susan and Jack's personal lives, which I thought was a nice way to bring this new character up to date with what we, the viewer, learned in the previous episode. We then have the main narrative establishing, and this did not go the way I was expecting, and I was actually, I don't know if it's just me being really confused by the way things were going until it was confirmed, but I didn't pick up on what was happening, so I was actually slightly confused. Jack is trying to convince a client to get a divorce. Susan thinks this client just needs therapy, and then we find out that actually this client is going to see Jack, but Jack told Ronnie that he's going to be in with clients all day. So if a woman comes up looking for him, and we learn that this woman is Claire, if she comes into the building, Ronnie has to tell her that Jack's busy with clients. And I thought, well, if Jack's trying to encourage this woman to get a divorce, why would he want Ronnie to tell her that he's busy and can't see her? And I feel like with hindsight, it made sense what happens next, but I didn't pick up on it, and I was so confused because Susan does come into the building. She's played by Sydney Walsh, and as instructed, Ronnie tells her that Jack is actually busy with clients, so he can't see her just now. And Susan, we learned from the previous episode, has a habit of kind of borrowing Jack's clients and encouraging them to stay in their marriage, which is obviously not helpful for Jack, who makes money from clients getting a divorce. And this is what happens here. Susan encourages Claire to go into her office. She has some time to talk with her. And I was thinking, why? Jack could have predicted this was going to happen. So why would he want Susan to talk with Claire and presumably encourage her to stay married if he was trying to get Claire to get a divorce? Do you see why I'm confused? But with hindsight, it makes perfect sense. So I think it was just me being really slow, and I will explain what happens. But I'd love to know if anybody else watches this episode. Did you pick up on what was happening immediately? Is it just me not realising? We then have Claire and Susan talking, and it seems like Claire is going to stay with her husband. That's clearly what Susan is usually going to be telling her clients, or at least telling them to have therapy, try and talk and work it out. That's not what happened. Claire and Susan come out of Susan's office just as Jack is finishing up with a client. And we realise they know each other. We realise that this is Claire, who Jack knew. And Claire says, I realise what I have to do. And then she runs into Jack's arms. And Jack then explains to Susan when they're alone that this was not what he wanted. It turns out that Jack actually wanted Claire to stay with her husband. She didn't want Claire to divorce him because Claire was really clingy and wanting to be with Jack, and Jack wanted to break it off with her. So he was hoping that by telling Ronnie to tell Claire, I hope you're following this, that he was busy with clients, he had predicted that Susan would talk with Claire, and based on Susan's track record, he'd assumed that Susan would convince Claire to stay with her husband, thereby giving him an easy way to break up the relationship. Or I guess Claire would break up the relationship with Jack and go back to her husband. He'd no longer have to try and find a way to break it off with her. Problem solved. Except that's not what happened. Susan was so taken by Claire's passionate discussion about her love life with who we now know is Jack, that she encouraged her to follow her heart, and she was going to break off with her husband and go with Jack, and that tremendously backfired. So once it was explained, it made perfect sense why Ronnie had to tell Claire Jack was busy. But I was so slow. It took me so long to piece together those bits of the puzzle, and I'd love to know if I was the only one, or if anybody else kind of didn't realise what was going on. A little while later, Jack's problem is actually solved because Claire comes back in, having forgotten her purse. She left her purse in Jack's office, and she has a talk with Ronnie while they're alone, and Ronnie tells Claire she must have married her husband for a reason, and if she leaves her husband, that reason will come back to bite her. And Claire realises that actually that's probably right, and she shouldn't throw away her marriage just for this romantic encounter with Jack. And Claire breaks it off with Jack, and Jack pretends to cry, and we have Susan on her knees applauding Jack for his performance, and that's how we end the episode. And I think it's a well-crafted narrative, but I definitely felt like a bit of an idiot for being very slow on the uptake. But I rather enjoyed it. I absolutely adore Susan. And yes, I am biased. I love Shelley Long, but I didn't have this same reaction to Kelly, her character in Kelly. I watched that first episode, really enjoyed it, but I wasn't in love with Kelly as a character, whereas I watched the first episode of Good Advice, and something just told me that this could be the start of a really beautiful relationship with a really wonderful character, and this second episode is kind of confirming that theory. It is still early days, but for now, I can say that I absolutely loved this second episode, and I absolutely love Susan. So I'm excited. I'm very excited to see what else this show has in store, and I thought Jack of Hearts was an absolute delight, even if it made me feel like a bit of an idiot.